Is the debug process different for hardware and software issues? Have you ever wondered if debugging hardware is the same as debugging software? This question is essential for anyone working in technology. Let's break it down. The debug process for hardware and software issues is indeed different. Each area requires its own set of tools, techniques, and approaches. When we talk about software debugging, we usually think of using software tools like debuggers. These tools allow developers to set breakpoints, which pause the program so they can inspect its state. There are two types of breakpoints: software and hardware. Software breakpoints modify the code in memory to trigger a debug event. In contrast, hardware breakpoints are implemented at the processor level and monitor instruction addresses. Software debugging focuses on fixing bugs in the code logic, syntax errors, and runtime errors. It is all about ensuring that the software behaves as intended. On the other hand, hardware debugging is a different ballgame. This process involves diagnosing physical components like microcontrollers, circuits, or peripherals. It often requires specialized hardware tools such as oscilloscopes, logic analyzers, and in-circuit emulators. The goal here is to check electrical signals and verify that all hardware components are functioning correctly. The key differences between hardware and software debugging are quite clear. First, the nature of the problem is different. Software debugging targets code and program logic, while hardware debugging focuses on physical components and electrical signals. Next, the tools used vary significantly. Software debugging relies on software debuggers and breakpoints, whereas hardware debugging requires measurement instruments and hardware test equipment. When it comes to breakpoints, the mechanisms differ as well. In software debugging, breakpoints can be software-based or hardware-based. In hardware debugging, breakpoints are not applicable in the same way. Instead, hardware events or signals are monitored. The environment for debugging also changes. Software debugging can often be done on development machines or simulators. In contrast, hardware debugging usually requires access to the physical device or a hardware emulator. For those mastering software debugging and fixing programming bugs effectively, knowing these distinctions is vital. Software debugging techniques heavily relying on breakpoints, stepping through code, and inspecting variables. These methods do not apply when debugging hardware faults. However, understanding hardware breakpoints can be beneficial when debugging embedded software running on microcontrollers. In practice, embedded developers often need to combine both approaches. They use software debugging tools to fix code issues while employing hardware debugging tools to verify the physical system. This is especially important when software bugs arise due to hardware faults or timing issues. Recognizing these differences helps in selecting the right tools and methods to efficiently identify and resolve problems. Understanding both processes can lead to more effective debugging, whether you are dealing with software or hardware issues.